we got the server to render. However, it's not playing very well with the front-end React application because the React application is still initializing the DOM with an empty list of contests and then going back to the API to fetch the actual list of contests. So I'm going to show you two solutions for this problem. First, on the front end, we can't actually initialize this code with an empty array. We have to initialize this code with the same data that we did on the server for the backend and front end to sync together without any problem. And we can't also reset the state here because that would be wasteful. If we have the data to begin with, then we don't need to reset the state. So I'm going to actually remove this code in here. And let's go back to the index.js. Since we need to bring the data before actually rendering the front-end component, I'll go ahead and make an Axios call here. And instead of setting the state, I'll do the React DOM render call itself in here. And the initial contests here are response.data.contests. So we don't need to set the state here. And we need Axios. We don't need it in app at all. So I'm going to remove it from app and put it in index. So let's actually test. Refresh. And you'll notice that this sync error is gone. And the reason it's gone because the markup that we are rendering from the server now matches exactly the markup that React is starting with. React does not start with an empty list. It does not use setState to regenerate the list, but it's still doing one wasteful API call to /API/contests. It's not really necessary to go back to the server because we already have this data. However, this is one solution to the problem. That is not too bad if you're okay with the client going back to the data API. I'll show you another solution that does not require us to go back to the API to fetch the data for the React component. And that solution is to also return the data itself from the server. So in server render, when we returned the DOM itself here, I'm going to go ahead and return two things. I'm going to return the initial markup that we need, and this would be the exact thing we returned before. And let's also return the initial data because we have it already. And this would be response.data. And we'll need to modify server.js to also include both of them in EJS. So this would give me an object with two properties, the initial markup and the initial data. And I want to include them both in EJS, so initial markup and initial data. And now in the index.js where I'm rendering the content, this is now called initial markup. I'll also include a script tag and put the initial data as a global variable on the window.initialData equal the initial data that I'm reading from the EJS variable. So that would be initial data. However, I can't really read it directly like that. I'll have to stringify it. So we can simply do JSON.stringify here. And now when I refresh the server, not only do I get the markup, I also get a global variable that holds all the data. So in my front-end component that renders, instead of doing an extra hit to the API, we can just render directly using window.data.contests. And I don't need Axios at all. Let me make sure everything is running correctly. Doesn't look like it's working here. Let's review. Server render returns both initial markup and the initial data. Perfect. It returns an object. And in the server.js, initial markup, initial data, we actually need to destructure those. Let's test and take a look at this. It looks like we have the markup back in here. So let me test it on the web. Definitely not working. View page source. Actually, it looks like it's working. I see initial data. So basically, what we need is window.initialData.contests. What did we actually use? We used data. This is initial data. Okay, let me test. Take a look at that. React is now re-rendering this view in sync with the server rendered view, and it's not giving me any errors. So here's what's happening. If I don't have JavaScript, the application is still working. It gives me an initial rendered markup using React DOM server. But if I do have JavaScript, not only do I get the markup, but I also get the data as a variable on the window.initialData. So I don't have to go back to the server to retrieve that data for the React application. So now the React application can re-render itself using the same data that we have from the server. And actually, this whole operation on the front end is going to be a no operation because React will find out that the same content is already rendered to the DOM, so it will not go back to the DOM and re-render it. So we get both the benefits of exposing our content to be visible for search engines, and also we get a little bit of performance improvement in the React front-end code because the browser already has a copy of the DOM that matches exactly what React will try to put back in the DOM, and the virtual DOM will just do nothing. So this is another solution, but you do have to pick your weapons here, because I'd imagine that some people would think that this is actually a hack. But it did save us an extra round trip from the client to the server.